scintillating dances and indeed very good performances that you have seen and recorded. Today, this morning, we want to think and reflect on some very salient and important aspects of our lives as Africans. Hence, the organization of this symposium with the theme African Culture in the 21st Century, Prospects and Challenges. African Culture in the 21st Century, Prospects and Challenges. And when I reflect on the topic, I ask myself the question, are there problematics with the topic? Is there an African culture, or are there African cultures? What is the definition of an African culture? Or what are the definitions of African cultures? Are the two the same? Are they interchangeable? We talk of an African culture. We talk of African cultures in view of the diversity of the peoples of Africa and the diversity of those cultures, even though we cannot dispute the commonalities that run across the broad spectrum of African cultures. So, our distinguished and eminent panelists will try to wade their way through this complex subject. And of course, you, the distinguished audience, will also have opportunity also to make contribution or to ask questions, so that by the time we finish this forum, perhaps we would have left this hall having a better insight as to really which way African culture, whether African culture, in the face of the onslaught of foreign influences, recognizing the fact that no culture is an island of its own. Culture is not static, it is dynamic. But why is there a need to preserve our culture, those intrinsic elements in our culture that account for our cultural identity as a people and as a continent? These, the distinguished panelists will try to explore. The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, in 1975, at a meeting in Mexico in the Intergovernmental Conference on Cultural Policies, defined culture as thus, and I quote, "Culture is the set of distinctive spiritual, material, intellectual, and emotional features of society or a social group, and that it encompasses, in addition to art and literature, lifestyles, ways of living together, value systems, traditions, and beliefs." This is the Intergovernmental Committee on Cultural Policies that tried to define culture in Mexico City in 1975. So we will look at the topic this morning, African culture in the 21st century, prospects and challenges, bearing in mind that culture is in two realms, both the tangible and the intangible. And when we look at Africa, some social scientists like to say that it is a continent that has the triple heritage. There is the Euro-Christian influence, the Arabo-Islamic influence, as well as the indigenous African culture. So there is a mix of all of these. But the question is, what are those intrinsic elements that continue to account for our cultural identity as a people and as a continent? This morning we have distinguished and eminent sons of the soil. One is Gambian, but spends most of his time in the United States of America.
I want to make it a global perspective, because not only are we talking about Africa and Africans in Africa surviving in the 21st century, we are a global people. In fact, my perspective is going to be the same today as it would be if I was teaching a class here or structuring the educational system here. We are a global people. Our history begins in Africa, but we should never, ever, ever start our history with slavery. We should not be defined by slavery. And I know that the people who say these things mean it. They have the best of intentions in the world. But I am not a descendant of slaves. I am a descendant of the first people to populate the planet Earth, the first people to give civilization and humanity to the world. As Brother Muto Baruka says, our African history is not slavery. Slavery interrupted African history. And that is the perspective that I want to bring to you today. Now, I'm a historian. My bio is a little different than we've been given. I'm a historian and an anthropologist, and I look at the global African community, and I try to do it visually. Now, people will say, why is history important? I think Malcolm X said it best when he said that of all our studies, it is history that is most qualified to reward our research. But nevertheless, all the time, people come to me, particularly young people, and they say, all that black stuff is good. All that history is good. How does that put money in my pocket? How does that feed my family? And what I say is this: what you do for yourself depends on what you think of yourself. And what you think of yourself depends on what you know of yourself. And what you know of yourself depends on what you have been told. So if you are told that your history starts with slavery, if you are told that your history starts with colonization, if you are told that you waited in a dark room for a white man to come into the room and switch on the light and bring you civilization, you're lost. Marcus Garvey used to say, if you have no confidence, you are defeated before you even start. And in order to have confidence, you have to have the sense that you've done something, that you've contributed to the world, that you have not been a hapless victim, that you have done more than suffer.
More than 10,000 years ago, settled habitation for more than 100 people became sustainable along the banks of the Nile. About 5,000 years ago, 3,150 BC, under Menes, Upper and Lower Egypt were united. The world's first nation state was born. Once again, we created the first. So you see, we have created, one thing, I think Bruno alluded to this, we created the first everything. Because we are the first people, and we created the first civilization, and everything that civilization meant. A system of government was devised to administer the business of the state: mathematics, science, astronomy, architecture, agriculture, writing, art, literature. All the basic necessities of a civilized existence were invented and spread throughout the world by us. I paused because I wanted to sink in. By us. All right. Egypt ruled the world for centuries and maintained a stable government for 3,000 years.